People talk about Wang Yibo's talent, his rise, his discipline, the work no one sees, but they rarely talk about something even bigger, the moment when an artist stops being just a performer and starts becoming a force of his own. Every major star in history eventually reaches a point where they must ask themselves a hard question. Who am I without the structure that built me? That question quietly found Wang Yibo in one of the most unexpected chapters of his career. It didn't happen during a drama shoot or a concert or a racing event. It wasn't triggered by fans or media or awards. It was born in the private space between exhaustion and clarity, during a year when everything around him was expanding, his fame, his responsibilities, his achievements, and yet something inside him began to feel smaller, too confined, too tightly held by an image that no longer matched who he was becoming. For most of his life, Yibo had been known as someone who worked inside a system. He entered the industry young. He grew up under structure, under management, under schedules, under rules that were designed to protect him and shape him. He became successful through that system. He became world-known under it. And for a long time, that system served him well. It gave him opportunities. It gave him direction. It gave him stability. But success changes the shape of a person. The more he grew, the more he discovered that outgrowing something doesn't always mean rejecting it. Sometimes it simply means you're ready for more responsibility than the structure is built to carry. The conversation began softly. Rumors started circulating that his contract might be ending soon. Fans whispered, analysts speculated, entertainment insiders tried to guess what his next move would be. But the truth was quieter. The truth was personal. The truth began in a single evening after a long day of filming, when he returned to his apartment, sat down with a cup of warm tea, and asked himself a question that only he could answer. Am I ready to choose my own direction fully? It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about rebellion. It was about evolution. It was about reaching a point where the only way to grow was to take ownership of every decision, the projects he chose, the schedule he followed, the risks he took, the voice he used, the identity he shaped. That night, for the first time, he imagined what independence could look like. Not leaving behind everything he built with others, but stepping into a space where he could be the architect of his own path. Where he could take his skills, acting, dancing, racing, performing, fashion, business, and merge them into something bigger than one career lane. He thought of all the artists who reached that stage, the ones who created their own studios, their own labels, their own production companies, their own creative ecosystems. People who started as performers and evolved into creators, innovators, leaders. The foundation of that path wasn't rebellion. It was maturity. As he sat there in the quiet glow of his dim living room, he realized something important. He had already been preparing for independence for years without noticing it. Every discipline he mastered, every challenge he embraced, every pressure he survived had quietly shaped him into someone capable of steering his own ship. The racing world taught him courage and precision. Acting taught him depth and emotional truth. Dance taught him discipline and body control. Stage performances taught him presence. Endorsements and brand collaborations taught him business and image strategy. All of it combined into a toolkit that didn't belong to a beginner anymore. They belonged to a man ready to shape his own narrative. But independence isn't a switch. It's a weight. And the first step wasn't excitement. It was fear. Not fear of failing, but fear of disappointing the people who trusted him, fear of losing stability, fear of stepping into a space where every success and every failure would be entirely his. Still, that fear didn't shrink him. It clarified him. The days that followed were filled with quiet observation. He paid attention to things he had ignored before. How decisions were made. How projects were chosen. How opportunities were filtered. What responsibilities belonged to him and which belonged to others. It felt like peeling back the layers of a system he had lived in but never fully examined. He wasn't judging it. He wasn't resenting it. He was simply recognizing that he had reached a different phase of his story. A phase where staying inside the same boundaries would keep him safe, but stepping outside them could unlock something powerful. One night, after a long meeting about upcoming schedules, he left the building and stood outside under the city lights. His team had discussed new deals, new offers, new projects, new responsibilities, but something inside him felt strangely distant. Not disconnected, just aware. Aware that everything they were planning for him was good, but not entirely his anymore. He walked to his car slowly, hands in his pockets, head lowered in thought. That was the moment he knew. He was no longer the boy who needed guidance. He was the man who needed ownership. The thought didn't scare him. It strengthened him. The next few weeks were filled with internal reflection. He met with people he trusted. He spoke to mentors. He listened. He asked questions. Not dramatic ones, thoughtful ones. The kind of questions someone asks when they are trying to understand the architecture of a future they might soon build from scratch. He learned how other artists formed their own studios. He learned how business teams worked behind the scenes. He learned about legal structures, creative autonomy, brand negotiation, production rights, long-term contracts, and licensing. He learned the difference between being represented and being in control. And as he learned, something became clear. Independence wasn't a fantasy. It was a possibility. A realistic, reachable possibility. One that aligned with his growth, his skills, his evolution, and his ambitions. But independence comes with another weight, responsibility for others. Because if he stepped into that world, it wouldn't just be him. He would eventually hire staff, build teams, support careers. He would become a foundation for people who would rely on him the way he once relied on others. And responsibility is not something he takes lightly. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that leadership wasn't a burden he feared. It was a role he was ready for. The turning point came unexpectedly. He was reviewing new scripts when he noticed a pattern. The roles being offered to him were good, but not aligned with the direction he wanted to explore. He wanted deeper, more complex characters. He wanted projects that challenged him. He wanted stories that resonated with him personally. But filtered opportunities don't always reflect personal vision. That was the moment he realized independence wasn't just about freedom, it was about alignment. Alignment between who he was and the choices shaping his future. He didn't announce anything. He didn't make bold statements. He simply continued thinking, learning, planning behind the scenes. And quietly, without telling anyone, he began shaping ideas for the kind of studio he would eventually want to build. A studio that blended entertainment, performance, racing, fashion, creativity, the multi-lane identity he embodied. Imagine a space where a project could come to life because he believed in it, not because it fit a corporate strategy, not because it followed trends, but because it meant something to him. That was the dream forming slowly, silently. As rumors outside grew louder, his inside world grew calmer. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need to confirm or deny anything. He simply needed to be ready for whichever decision he eventually made. Because readiness is what turns a risk into a step. One evening, after wrapping an outdoor shoot, he sat on the steps of the location, looking out at the fading sky. The team was packing equipment. The wind was cool. His mind was clear. And for the first time, the decision didn't feel heavy. It felt natural, organic, like a chapter meant to follow the last one. He didn't know exactly when he would take the step, but he knew he would. When the timing aligned, when the foundation was right, when the path felt solid beneath his feet, he would step into independence not as a gamble, but as a progression. He wasn't walking away from his past. He was walking towards his potential. And that is the story no one sees. The quiet evolution of Wang Yibo from artist to architect, from performer to decision-maker, from guided talent to independent force. This is not a story of rebellion. It is a story of maturity. A story of a man who grew so much that the only space left to grow was the one he built himself. And when that moment finally arrives, the moment he becomes fully independent, the world won't see it as a surprise. They'll see it as the next chapter he had been preparing for all along.